This is Chapter 2 from Tab 1, and the chapter is entitled Getting to Know Your Audience. The basics of this chapter is just making sure that you understand the importance of knowing your audience and situation, as this will aid you in writing your speech. So the very first thing that chapter talks about is things that knowing your audience will assist you with, or what it will aid you in while you are doing some public speaking. The very first thing it talks about is it will help you make better speech decisions, because if you know what the audience wants to know about, that will help you pick your topic. It will foster audience attention and goodwill, because if you don't have the audience on your side, you will have no way of keeping their attention and allowing them to be able to take in the message that you are trying to send. It will also help you feel more confident, because you will know that you are giving a speech that the audience wants to hear. So the very first step is to see what you know about your audience, or things you can find out about your audience. So you need to know the attitudes, beliefs, values, and personal traits of your audience. Now, I know it's incredibly difficult and impractical for you to go to every single audience member and ask them their opinion on your speech topic, as well as it is just not a realistic idea to assume that every single person in the audience is going to have the exact same ideas about your speech. However, if you know enough about the audience you are presenting to, it can help at least assist in coming up with a topic that will at least capture and keep the attention of a majority of your audience. So the perfect example is if I was to give a speech on the importance of raising tuition costs at North Iowa Area Community College, I would need to be very careful and make sure I know my audience if I want to have a speech that might be received by the audience in the way I intend. So if I'm giving a speech to the students, I'm not going to talk about the bureaucracies or the inner workings of a college, or the importance of giving raises to certain areas, or funding things that apply only to the staff and the instructors there, because those are things that students aren't going to want to hear, so they're going to be less likely to want to hear my speech about the importance of raising tuition costs. Instead, if I knew I was giving a speech to a student body, I would more likely craft it around things that would apply to them or aid them in agreeing that raising tuition costs is acceptable. If I talked about the importance that raising tuition costs would lower book costs, or if I was to talk about the new services that would be offered to students, which are important to them, if I was to talk about how raising it just a small amount would do all of these things, and I was to break it down in a way that lets students feel like it would not be an overly large burden on them to raise the tuition slightly, and what they'd be getting from it, the benefits of it, would outweigh the small, minimal raise in tuition, I might have a better chance. But at the same time, I need to understand that as soon as I bring up the topic of raising tuition costs, I'm going to have an immediate backlash from the student body, because the student body does not want to have to pay more money for their education. So I know that that's their attitudes and their beliefs and their values, and I understand that. I would also have to recognize that for some people, making the suggestion to raise tuition costs would affect their psychological needs, which is something that the book talks about, and they call it Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you will find that on page 32. And it talks about these 5 steps that if the very base of the pyramid, if your physiological needs are not being met, then anything that would apply to their lives that is on a different level of that pyramid doesn't even concern them. So physiological needs talks about your need for shelter, your need for warmth, your need for food, water, rest, those kinds of things. If a student doesn't know how they're going to buy dinner tomorrow night, then me talking about raising tuition costs is just going to be too much for them. And so I need to recognize that as well. So while it's impossible to know every single person's beliefs, every single person's stance in your entire audience, if you can at least make inferences about the audience as a whole, that will assist in making sure that you come up with a speech topic that will be interesting and engaging with them. At the same time, also making sure that you take into account stereotyping word choices and things along those lines, because as soon as you start attacking groups of people, as soon as you start making generalizations about different groups of people, as soon as you start making assumptions or using coarse language or things along those lines, the audience is no longer listening to your message and is instead too busy being offended or too busy concentrating on the fact that you dropped a swear word than on what you were trying to convey. So all of those things are equally important when you are determining your speech topic. The other thing that's important to know about your audience is the place, audience size, time, and occasion. So what I mean by that, or what the book means by that, is it's important to know the audience that you are presenting to. So if you are giving a speech to 10 of your colleagues, that speech is going to be crafted very, very differently than if you're giving a speech to 500 strangers. If you're giving a speech to 10 of your colleagues, you might be more likely to use stories and anecdotes that they were there for. You might be more personable. It might be a more informal speech where you kind of sit in a circle kind of thing. Versus if you're giving a speech to 500 strangers, you can't share those same stories because they were not there. They did not experience them. They were not privileged to those stories. So they would not be able to relate in the same way. Also, time of your speech is something that is very important to know as well. So for example, time could be something along the lines of, do you have 5 minutes to give your speech or an hour to give your speech? That's going to determine what information you include or choose not to put into your speech as you're writing it. Along those same lines too, time is something that's important to know about. And by that I mean time of day. So if you're giving a speech first thing in the morning, when everybody's still pretty tired, just woken up, things along those lines, you're going to have a different struggle than if you're giving a speech right after everybody got amped up and is excited about whatever your topic is going to be on. Along those same lines, you have to take the occasion into account. So a birthday party or a retirement party is not necessarily the time to choose to have give a political speech. Instead, that would be more of a time to have a commemorative or special occasion speech. So those types of things will also aid you in deciding what topic to give your speech on. Lastly, the book also talks about taking into account the place. So where are you giving this speech? Are you giving it in a classroom? Are you giving it on the street? Are you giving it at a family gathering? Are you giving it at work? All of these things are going to dictate the words you choose to use and whether or not you choose to use jargon and the stories you may or may not choose to tell. Every single aspect of your speech will change and be tailored to the audience. And so the more you know about the audience, the better your speech is going to be and the more likely it will be to appeal to a majority of the people there. So how do you do that? How do you know what your audience is going to be? How do you know what the situation is going to be? The book talks about quite a few different ways, but for the most part, at least the time, place, and occasion will be given to you by the person asking you to give this speech. So a lot of that information will be provided to you already. And same thing with the audience size. A lot of times if you ask the person that is asking you to give the speech, they will be able to give you that information. For the speeches you will be giving in this class, all of that information will be provided for you. But now about the intricacies of the audience, the makeup of them, their beliefs, their stereotypes, those kinds of things, that's when stopping to think and brainstorm, interview and survey if able, or just doing research will assist in that. So if you're giving a speech at an organization and you can go and read up and learn about that organization, it's going to assist you in tailoring that speech to something that the members of that organization want to hear. Then lastly, we talked about this in Chapter 1, but it's still equally important in Chapter 2. The more you know about the place you're giving your speech at, the more you'll be able to adapt to any external noise. So any environmental barriers. So if you're giving a speech outside, there could be planes overhead or cars honking or people talking or walking by. There could also be linguistic barriers. If you're giving a speech to people where English is not their first language, you might change some of the words that you use so that way they're more likely to be able to understand and follow what you're saying. On the flip side of that, also adapting to internal noise. And so this is when knowing your audience's beliefs, values, and things along those lines are going to assist in getting your audience to pay attention in the first place and to maintain their attention throughout your speech. So if you can make sure that you are aware of their beliefs as much as possible, it's going to help you in tailoring the speech that is not going to turn them off or get them so busy coming up with a counter argument that they stop listening to you. And as well, when we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, understanding that some physiological barriers may be a little more difficult to overcome, and that means that you may lose some of your audience. But the more information you have about your audience as a whole, and the more information that you are able to get, it's going to assist you in not only selecting a topic that is important to you, it will also be important to them, and it will be something that they will want to see, something that they will want to listen to, and something that they will be invested in. And if you can give a speech that is crafted like that and takes all those things into consideration, you already have 80% of the hard work completed. The next lecture will be on Chapter 3, which will be covering, after all of the audience analysis, how do you go about selecting your speech topic. And that's what Chapter 3 will be covering.